Donald Trump says a lot of stupid and inaccurate things. He also says that the radical left wants, quote, open borders.
They really would like to have open borders where anybody in the world can just flow in, including from the Middle East.
Now, many people will dismiss this as demagoguery, because what serious person argues for open borders?
Open borders?
Open borders.
That's a Koch brothers proposal. The
Really?
idea, of course. I mean, that's a right-wing proposal which says essentially there is no United States.
But it would make a lot of the global poor richer, wouldn't it?
And it'd make everybody in America poor. Then you're doing away with the concept of a nation state. And I don't think there's any country in the world which believes in that.
Yeah. The only problem, Bernie, there are a lot of intelligent and powerful people who believe just that.
I'm an internationalist. I don't believe in borders. I want free flow of people, of goods, of ideas. Are we liberals or are we not? Do you really want borders?
You tell me.
I mean, once upon a time, there were no passports. The world was a much better place. I think borders are a sign of failure of the human species.
This is Yanis Varoufakis, the former finance minister of Greece and a overall extremely influential figure. And unfortunately for all of us, Yanis is not only genuinely intelligent and ostensibly decent, he is not someone who can be dismissed outright as a lunatic. In order to push back against what I believe is this ridiculous idea of open borders, we need to steelman Yanis's perspective and then deconstruct it. It's not difficult to understand the archetypal allure of an idea like open borders. Cosmopolitanism is not an uncommon ideological aesthetic. It's the idea that all human beings are part of a single global community, and national identity is a relevant but not fundamental characteristic, like many people, including myself, would consider skin color to be. And economically, it's not entirely unreasonable to have hesitance towards industrialized nations wanting to reshore manufacturing and industry in their own countries rather than in developing nations.
Just think, what will happen to developing economies once it is cheaper to produce textiles or cars in California than in Mexico?
But I think it's pretty clear that most people, including myself, are of the opinion that a nation-state has an obligation to look out for its own citizens first and foremost.
If you believe in a nation state, or in a country called the United States, or UK, or Denmark, or any other country, you have an obligation, in my view, to do everything we can to help poor people.
It's the old idea that in order to help others, you have to first be able to help yourself.
And remember to always put your own mask on first before helping others.
There's a deep philosophical divide beneath these two perspectives. And in my opinion, the source of that divide is some people taking Marxism a little too seriously. While Bernie Sanders may be a socialist in name, he, and I suspect most of his supporters, are not Marxist fundamentalists who take ideas like dialectical materialism very seriously. But I don't think the same can be said for Yanis.
First, if you're truly a Marxist, like I consider myself to be, but not like, in the tradition of the Marxists, but in the tradition of Karl Marx himself.
Here is the steelman of my understanding of Yanis's perspective in a nutshell. As a Marxist, Yanis believes economics and the material conditions of one's environment are the fundamental factor in determining one's beliefs, values, and culture. Marx uses the metaphor of a cultural superstructure made up of ideas, law, religion, etc., sitting on top of the material conditions in the economic base of society.
In sum, the superstructure refers to all parts of society that are not directly part of the productive process. And we can see how, in the superstructure's totality, through a million different ways comprising both directly repressive state force and ideological control, it creates these societal norms that make the economic base appear to simply be common sense, or the natural order of things.
If borders were erased and capital and people were allowed to flow freely across countries, then the material conditions of that economic base would change. And in Yanis's eyes, the cultural concept of an isolated nation-state would melt away in favor of a cosmopolitan global culture. This, I think, is in part how he justifies very bold claims like this.
Look, Freddie, we Europeans exported hordes of people. We emigrated to the four corners of the universe, of the planet. We populated the earth from Latin America to North America to Asia to Africa, millions, usually armed as well, right? As imperialists. We had no qualms about that for 1,000 years. All that has happened is that we're getting old. Demographically, we are aging. So, migratory flows have reversed. We need migrants. The more the merrier.
My fundamental disagreement with this Marxist perspective is that A, cultural differences do matter, and B, cultural differences are shaped less so by material conditions than by narrative conditions. To the first point, it should be fairly obvious that you cannot have a functioning society made up of people whose belief systems are fundamentally at odds with one another.
Well, multiculturalism is the idea that the cultures can all be put together in a single place with no overarching structure or undergirding structures. Like, that's not the case. How can that possibly be the case? That defines the situation in the world, and the world is full of war. So how can that possibly work? If you're going to bring people together and they're going to exist together in harmony, they have to be playing a game that everyone plays, that everyone knows the rules for. It can't be 10 different sets of rules for different people. That isn't going to work. So it's absolutely naive to believe. If that worked, the world wouldn't be full of war.
And what's more, when I say that cultural differences are more a product of narrative conditions than material conditions, I mean that the structure of any individual's psyche is more likely to be influenced by ideas, or archetypal memes to be specific, than by the material conditions one inhabits.
The meme idea is very interesting, and I do think that there are contagious ideas, but that needs to be chased down much deeper, because there are ideas that are so contagious that we've actually adapted to them biologically. And once that happens, they're no longer merely memes. They're something else. They're built into us.
The ideas that are, quote, built into us are going to have a greater impact on our behavior than the level of wealth in our society, although obviously wealth and capital have significant modulating effects. For example, communist China did liberalize and embraced free markets to some degree, but unlike what many believed would happen eventually, China has certainly not abandoned their totalitarian ideologies. Additionally, it's clear that even in wealthy Islamic theocracies, the argument could be made that they treat women worse than poor liberal democracies. All of this points to the fact that a globe made up of people with fundamentally opposing values cannot have those values changed simply by improving material conditions. Hence the fatal flaw in the idea of open borders. Like I said, Giannis is extremely intelligent, and his critique of capitalism through the metaphor of techno-feudalism is brilliant. And if conservatives stopped strawmanning all Marxists as people to be summarily dismissed, both the left and the right would have a better linguistic toolkit to properly diagnose the problems that everyone agrees are plaguing our economic structures.
The purpose of which is to allow the owner of cloud capital to extract gigantic rents from vassal capitalists. The capitalists are now vassals to the techno-feudal lords, the people who own the cloud capital.
Elon Musk's or equivalent.
Yeah.
There's obviously a lot more to say on this topic, but hopefully this was a useful framework to understand my concerns with the Marxist fundamentalists. As always, good luck and Godspeed.